These McDaniel family movies span 1948 to about 1953. In 1948, Mom and Dad and Eddie and baby Phil left San Francisco and headed to Thailand. There were people, of course, waving goodbye from the wharf, and in those days it was the custom to attach streamers from the loved ones to the people on board the ship until those streamers broke and pulled away.
The voyage was made on one of the ships of the President lines, either the President Wilson or the President Cleveland. In those days, it was cheaper to go by boat than to fly. Part of the voyage involved a lifeboat drill. This was so that our ship wouldn't suffer the same fate as the Titanic, I suppose. The voyage took the young family from San Francisco to Shanghai and to Hong Kong.
Well, apparently there wasn't a whole lot to see other than to watch what the crew was up to. Partly things they needed to accomplish, and they did some of it while they were under sail. Here's the stopover that they made in Shanghai.
The Yangtze River flows through Shanghai and out into the Pacific Ocean, or perhaps we should say the South China Sea. The Yangtze River is very muddy, and there's a very clear demarcation between the Yangtze River water and the ocean water once you get past the Yangtze River.
Hong Kong was as far as the President lines went, so the McDaniel family got off in Hong Kong with their friends the Marvins, and they headed up the tram railway. And this was a lifelong fascination for our dad. Every chance he got, he rode this type of railway up steep hills, and he especially loved the one in Hong Kong, which was a very long way up.
Very long and very steep, and with a spectacular view of Hong Kong Harbor down below.
We were commenting to each other earlier about how hard he worked to get all these different angles so he could show the cars going up and down. The Hong Kong Peak Railway, I think is what it was called. Now we're seeing the peak, the area on top with the cafe where apparently they stopped to have a little refreshment. This is Ed with their friend Rob Marvin, and you kind of won't believe what this little toddler was, where he was sitting. Gives us the heebie-jeebies. And there he is sitting with his dad, the two Eds together.
The Hong Kong airport was a tricky place for pilots to land and take off from because of the surrounding mountains and the relatively short runway. This was subsequently greatly expanded. The trip from Hong Kong to Bangkok was a fairly short one.
And this would have been a momentous time for our dad. He had been away from Siam for a long, long time through his high school, college, and medical school years and was very homesick. So the minute he landed, apparently he took the opportunity to take movies of what was at hand, which happened to be the guard for the king marching by and some Buddhist monks.
A task that Dad undertook early on in his time in Thailand was to load the McCain leprosarium van onto a flatbed rail car so it could be transported up to Chiang Mai.
We've been having good laughs about his safari hat, which he ditched later on. And here we think maybe this is furniture that's being purchased to take up to Chiang Rai for the family, although we're not certain of that.
Bangkok used to be called the Venice of the East because of its multiple canals. These used to be a major artery of transportation. However, over time, the canals were filled in and roads were widened. While the canals were still present, kids had fun swimming and splashing around and boating in the canals.
What we're seeing here are the children of John and Lavina McDaniel, and actually our brother Ed climbing up on the left here. John and his family came out to Bangkok right after World War II as missionaries, and he was assigned to the task of reopening the Bangkok Christian Hospital. But it turned out that there was nothing left of the hospital, and he had to start from scratch, which was not something he was very comfortable with. And it turned out also that Lavina, his wife, was bitten by a cobra and ended up with some kind of neurologic problem that caused loss of balance, and they fairly soon went back to the States. Streetcars aren't a part of Bangkok scene anymore, but they used to be.
Upon arrival back in Thailand, Ed was eager to see how the work his parents had poured their hearts into was getting on. We think he visited Petbury, where Ed's dad and mom had worked in the early 1900s, and also Nakhon Si Thammarat, where Ed's dad worked many years in the Christian hospital and had also founded what in those days was called a leper home. We think these buildings are related to the work of Ed's parents. Not long after arriving in Thailand, Ed and Charlotte attended a large gathering of missionaries and national Christian leaders. We think this had something to do with the reconstitution of the Presbyterian mission work in Thailand, which had come to a standstill during World War II. In this footage, we see the faces of many missionaries that Carol and I knew.
In fact, here we're seeing Herb Grether and Jeannie Grether there on the right. They were really second parents to me. I lived with their family for 3 years of high school, and their daughter Mary and I were best friends, and Phil was best friends with their son Mark.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands.
One of our favorite places to go on vacation, partly because it was cool and partly because it was a little bit remote and adventurous, using pressure lamps at night, was Kuntan. There were some mission cabins, and this was a place that many missionaries went for their vacation during the hottest month of the year, which was April. Orchids abounded in those days, growing on trees all through the forest. Water was brought down to the cabins via bamboo aqueducts. These were high maintenance, requiring frequent cleaning and frequent repair.
Well, here we see Eddie and Mom arriving in a truck, and they are apparently in the town of Masai, which is right on the border between Thailand and Burma, or now called Myanmar. And this cracks me up because even though the sign says not to enter, people who are locals seem to come and go pretty fluidly. This presumably is the bridge separating, or the water separating, Masai on the Thailand side from Burma. And we think they must have crossed over that little bridge and then gone over to the Burma side for a little outing. Apparently, from this viewpoint, you could look down probably into Burma, and then this particular trip seems to have concluded with some Kentucky Fried Chicken. Oh no, it would have been just regular fried chicken, which Eddie is saying is pretty good.
Now, being way down south, we usually went for vacations to the beach at Nong Kea. Incidentally, this beach rest area of Nong Kea was opened by my dad. It developed into a very useful rest area for the missionaries. But Nong Kea was a very small station, and normally the express train, which is what we always took, would not stop at Nong Kea. But by asking well ahead of time, one could get the train to make a special stop at Nong Kea. Usually they wouldn't do this unless there were a good many people either getting on or getting off. Well, we got off the train, usually in the middle of the morning, and started to make our trek from the railroad down to the beach. Very, very hot, going through a bamboo jungle, along paths deep in sand, usually behind an ox cart which was taking our suitcases and our food parcels and other things that we needed for vacation down to the beach. And after a long walk in the hot sun, through the jungle, we'd finally spy the ocean water off in the distance and begin to feel the cool breezes. And my goodness, that was certainly a treat.
You've got a friend in me. You've got a friend in me. When the road looks rough ahead and you're miles and miles from your nice warm bed, you just remember what your old past said. Boy, you got a friend in me. Yeah, you got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. You got trouble, and I got them too. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for you. If we stick together, see it through, 'cause you've got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. Some other folks might be a little bit smarter than I am, big and stronger too, maybe, but none of them will ever love you the way I do. It's me and you, boy, and as the years go by, our friendship will never die. You're gonna see it's our destiny. You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me. You got a friend in me.
First I ride my bicycle very slowly, ba 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 ba, bicycle riding. Then I ride my bicycle a little bit faster, ba 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 ba, bicycle riding.
La mer qu'on voit danser le long du golfe clair a des reflets d'argent. La mer des reflets changeants sous la pluie. La mer, au ciel d'été, confond ses blancs moutons avec les anges si purs. La mer, bergère d'azur infinie. Voyez, près des étangs, ces grands roseaux mouillés. Voyez, ces oiseaux blancs et ces maisons rouillées. La mer.
For the beauty of the earth, for the glory of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the wonder of each hour, of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of night. Lord of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the church that of the Lord lifted holy hands above, offering up an
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Philip. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Philip. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday!
Well, this appears to be Eddie's 7th birthday, and Mom was very spry in those days and organized some fun games. One of the people that we're seeing playing these games is a John Tirapong, who later became the hospital administrator at McCormick Hospital. At this time, Ed was attending school in Thai, or he attended a Thai school. And so many of his friends were his classmates from their little school. I suspect Mom made these hats. They're pretty wonderful. And this is one of my favorite bits of footage in all Dad's movies, watching Ed doing a Thai dance of sheer joy.
If you look carefully in the background, I think you'll see Overbrook Hospital across the street from our house. A hospital ambulance was purchased during Dad's first term in Thailand. It was never intended for racing along paved roads with lights flashing and siren blaring. Rather, it was a Jeep with four-wheel drive for picking up or delivering patients who would have had difficulty getting to the hospital without it. On those dirt roads, the ambulance frequently got quite dirty and had to be washed periodically. Conveniently, there was a river that ran close to the hospital compound.
I said to myself, well, come what may, I am going to take time away from the hospital for a few days to give this hunting trip to Eddie. Where we were to get on the raft was very muddy and in places flooded. In fact, the road was so bad that even jeeps could not go. However, ox carts could still go. So the next morning at 4 o'clock, Eddie and Don Rulison and I started walking behind an ox cart which was carrying our suitcases, our water bottles, our medical kits, what have you. Well, he said that you go to Phang and then take a trip up a bit north of Phang yet to a place called Ta Saton, and that there would be the place to get on the raft. Now this raft is made entirely of cut bamboo in several layers and all lashed together with a rattan, and complete with quite a big roof over the center part to keep the sun off the travelers. But as we were taking our suitcases through the shallow water out to where the raft was tied up, I was approached by a young Chinese chap, must have been about 25 years old, and he said, may I go with you on your raft? I have some business to do downriver. So somewhat reluctantly, I said, all right, he could go on our raft. And so we cast off and started to float down the Makok River. Finally, on the 5th shot, I hit one of these birds, and immediately the boatmen started to make a scramble to maneuver the raft in such a way that we could intercept this bird as it was floating downriver. And in fact, they succeeded in doing that. And that's the bird that we had that night when we tied up at the edge of the river. Well, while the boat trip, or shall I say the raft trip, was in progress, I got to talking with the older Chinese man, and he said, what have you shot with your shotgun? And I said, well, I haven't really shot anything but a mad dog and then this bird that you just saw me shoot. And he said, well, would you like to shoot a deer? I said, oh, yeah.
For the rest of the story, listen to Wild Elephants in Dad's Recorded Stories. We don't really know who this pilot is or what his mission was, but he seemed to have caused a turnout of most of the foreign community in Chiang Rai. He came in a one-engine plane and had quite a challenge leaving in that one-engine plane. Nobody seemed to be able to start it. So many strong men had a turn at starting this machine. Apparently it didn't have a starter motor. So they either had to turn the prop or they had to turn this crank, which I believe made a flywheel spin. And then the momentum of the flywheel was supposed to engage the shaft that turned the propeller and start the engine. So after several men had tried the crank, the pilot got out and apparently manipulated the propeller in the hope of getting engine oil where it was supposed to be, I guess. Here's Dad giving it a try, and you'll notice he works up pretty good speed. But when the pilot engages the flywheel, the engine just sputters a bit. So, person after person, man after man, I should say, tried to start the engine and failed. And then this young lady missionary got cranking, and lo and behold, the engine caught and started firing.
So we think it's a remarkable story in the sense that it took a woman to get this plane off the ground.
We call this sequence the Mighty Maiden.
that light in your eyes. You're never too old to love, it's never too late to try. When somebody needs you, give them all you can give. When you're living to love and loving to live, stay young, keep your wheels in motion. You've got everything that you need. Stay young with your rock and rolling. All the best things in life are free. Like playing the fool, just step out of line, break all the rules. Don't you let them tell you it's not for you. Don't go growing old before you're due. Stay young, keep your wheels in motion. You've got everything that you need.
felt that there was a need for an upgrade to the water supply for the hospital. To this end, he supervised the hauling of water tanks up into the attic. The process turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. As you can see, they made 2 long rails extending from the ground all the way up to the attic and slid and pulled the water tanks up the rails. It looks like the rails were actually pipes. This may have been a mistake in that pipes aren't necessarily very strong where they are joined together.
So it was the idea of putting the tanks up in the attic because the water then would be gravity fed?
I believe that's the case. All I know is they tried to get 2 tanks up into the attic and had an awful time doing so.
So it looks like they're attaching the pulley.
So you can see how the pipe is bending right where the joint is.
It sure does look precarious.
Here it looks as though the first tank finally made it into the attic and was pulled forward to its intended resting place. However, it appears that a second tank fell off the track. Since the hospital was constructed largely of wood, one of his concerns was fire. He decided to place fire extinguishers in strategic locations around the hospital. However, he was afraid that hospital staff would not feel confident enough to actually use them in case of a real fire, unless they got some practice beforehand or at least saw a demonstration. The fire extinguisher demonstration brought out the courage in many and provided entertainment for all, including some students from a nearby school.
I can remember Dad saying that at night the nurses would use candles to bring the patients their medications, and the patients slept under mosquito netting, and it gave Dad nightmares to think what would happen if one of the mosquito nets were to catch fire. Well, the hospital painter had a long way to go up a very rickety ladder in order to reach the underside of the roof that he was painting.
Notice that the long ladder he is climbing appears to be 3 ladders spliced together with a generous overlap between ladders. This is mechanically more stable than the joints in the water pipes we saw earlier. trip back to the United States for our first furlough was, of course, an exciting adventure, not least because the ship we sailed on had a swimming pool. I remember my brother Ed telling me that it was easy to swim. You just jump in the water and swim. So I tried that one day and started to thrash around and did not stay afloat very well, so I grabbed on to the nearest person there who happened to be a young girl, and I kind of crawled up her so I could get some air. She did not appreciate it. After that, I was more careful to wear a life preserver. Early on in the voyage, there was a lifeboat drill.
I left in this footage of the water foaming up behind the ship because Dad was so very fond of taking footage of water, blue water, and beautiful white foam.
On the ship, there was many means of entertainment, including shuffleboard, and there were walks that could be taken on the promenade deck. The walk one lap around the ship seemed to me to be a long distance. The passengers were occasionally given access to the control room. Ed had a chance to steer the ship. Of course, there probably wasn't any real connection between the wheel and the direction of the ship.
Mom was always such a willing subject to point to things so that Dad's movies could be enhanced with some action and some interest.
Here is Diamond Head as the ship moves into the harbor at Hawaii.
I think this is some of the most stunning footage that Dad ever took of Mom. The lei around her neck. And here we're looking back down on the Waikiki area. And again, now it would just be covered in condominiums.
Here we are on Diamond Head. The folks in the picture are Mom and Carol, who must have been about 9 months old at this point, and Philip, who was in the picture a little earlier.
This footage became kind of notorious in the family because of how I had to crawl around in this awkward dress.
We think the cemetery down below here is a cemetery for soldiers and sailors who died in the Pearl Harbor attack.
believe how much of this footage I've already cut out, and there's still lots of it. Obviously, this was a movie maker's paradise for Dad.
One of these boats that took tourists up close to the falls was called the Maid of the Mist. Here are some tourists clad in raincoats going to take a trek close to the falls. Even the passengers on the Maid of the Mist wore rain gear. Carol is on the left, Mom to the right, and there is myself, Philip. Later in this cross-country trip, we went to Texas, where we visited my dad's brother, Uncle John. He took us fishing, and this was a new experience for us.
I think it would be safe to say Ed was not enjoying himself on this fishing expedition.
Dinosaur Park was lots of fun for Ed and I. We climbed all over these dinosaurs, and of interest is that the Triceratops here is, we think, exactly the same Triceratops that Mom was climbing on when Dad took pictures of her many years before. Here we are at a fish hatchery. My dad was fascinated by the efficiency of fish production.